I was at the California Republican convention in the year 2016, before it all went to shit. No, and there were counter protesters protesting Trump, and I was inside covering it for Newsbroke, and the Republicans loved that there were counter protesters. It's like they were a person. It's like they constructed their whole identity because there were protesters out there, and they were so excited. They wanted to like ogle and, you know, rubberneck and get a little view at these protesters. And it's like, that is like a,
Yeah.
I feel like that's a distillation of our politics, is like, well, if you're mad about it, then I think I'm doing the right thing. At least a lot of conservative ideology. Not that I have a bias, but I totally do.
No, but you're absolutely right. And so when we talk about the psychological asymmetry across liberals and conservatives are not just different on how they think about policy. Part of the explanation for why people are, especially socially and culturally conservative, has to do with how they orient towards threats in their environment. And they are more likely to be monitoring for threats, more likely to be vigilant. This creates all kinds of cognitive approaches to the world, like a need for closure and certainty and structure and order and all of these things. It also is fascinating to me because just because conservatives are monitoring for threat doesn't mean they're trying to avoid the threat. And a lot of the social scientists who study this stuff are themselves probably liberal. I mean, because that's what social scientists often are. And I think that there's a confusion that like, oh, okay, conservatives are threat monitors because they want to avoid threat. No, they don't. They're monitoring for threat so that they can run at it and get it and take control and bring it down. So anytime you are exposing someone with that kind of psychological makeup to a threat, that's going to create arousal, not the like happy, like sexy kind, but emotional arousal, right? Like,
I mean, I do think Tucker Carlson gets a little aroused.
You know what?
Talking about Black Lives Matter.
You know what? That is what we call in the business an empirical question. We could look into that. I will not look into that.
Tweet at Tucker Carlson. No, just tweet sweet things. We have learned.
Yes. We only we delete tweets when we feel like it was too harsh or we need a job. Like in my case, that's the only time I delete tweets. So when you're saying about an individual level, is that because you think that the governmental level is not working or could not work? I mean, I think in the wake of January 6th, we're all now seeing the real world consequences of people who buy into conspiracy theories, whether that's there's a grand plan from a dark lord named Q or the election was stolen from Trump. But the question mark is how to combat it. And we've said that, I've said that I don't believe that there should be a new war on terror, right? Because that was an utter failure. But also, like, do you think there's anything the government can say or like a public service announcement? Maybe it's a public service announcement with you being like, here's how to talk to your friends and family.
Okay. I thought you were going to take that in a different direction. I was going to be like, danger, danger. I thought you were going to say, is there anything that the government should do to regulate mis and disinformation?
Okay.
And I will say, hey, no, I know that it's tempting and you kind of want to be like, can't they fix that? We never want anyone in the reins of power to be in the position where they can be arbiter of truth.
Right. Sure.
That's just bad. It's just not good. We don't.
They try real hard.
I know. We don't want that.
Responsibility.
We don't want that. But I think that the idea that I think that the more that people become aware of some of these dynamics, the more they'll recognize that every individual behavior feeds into it. And I'll tell you what, say what you will about Joe Biden. I think that Biden really does understand some of these dynamics. And, he's okay. So I'm a professor at the University of Delaware. Go Blue Hens. And I don't know if you know this about
Blue
Joe
Hens.
Biden, but
okay. Keep going.
Biden is also a blue hen. So he's come to Delaware a lot and he's given these great talks and he is very sensitive to the idea that there are people who feel maligned, who feel left behind. And the way to get them on board is not by calling them out and mocking them. And I think he understands that quite well. And that informs his discourse and his rhetoric.
Yeah. I mean, and when we're sort of skirting around who feels disempowered, and the answer, I think, is white people feel like, that they are somehow missing out because the country is becoming more equal.
Yeah. And you know what? Let me just say that is, again, an empirical question. I have been shouting about this study because it's amazing. Liliana Mason and her co-authors looked at through panel data to figure out who did Trump attract. The answer is Trump attracted those groups that had resentment towards marginalized groups. Those were the individuals who were politically activated by Trump's rhetoric. We know this. This is not like a shocker, but when you're able to see it in the data, it's pretty jarring.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, and he touched that third rail of the GOP we were talking about before that Bush sort of had under wraps, but like it was they were clearly openly Islamophobic, and I mean, not openly, they were clearly Islamophobic and going after Muslims and immigrants and the other so-called. But the language was different, whereas Trump was like, no, I'm going to swallow the dog whistle, and now I just talk and whistle.
I think that... Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
If you don't mind, I was gonna say with Biden, you know how like he'll say like my reasonable colleagues on the right, et cetera, that sort of thing. That's good as far as like what you're talking about, how like treating them with respect, making them feel heard, that sort of thing. But I think on the left, what people get a little bit careful about and scared of is that he's doing that so that, he could do right-wing policies,
right?
So that he can do things that we disagree with. So another tricky balance to strike.
Yeah, like at what point do you draw the line in the sand? At what point do you not want to come together and kumbaya with like insurrectionists?
Yeah, I would say never. not
a good thing. I wanted to ask about your book about, irony and outrage, because I've had this theory and I haven't read your book, which is a sad thing. Especially,
can I just say, I've done a lot of interviews about my book, and I know many of them didn't read it. I think Ezra Klein actually did read it because he's Ezra Klein.
Nice.
But I don't think the rest of them did, but you're the first person to say it, and you get points for that.
For actually admitting that I haven't?
Yes.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Oh, I didn't read it either.
Jesse.
I didn't read it.
No, you can't. We'll have to share points. But I love the title, and I love it because I often talk about how I fundamentally don't really think that the right understands irony and sarcasm.
It is the whole book. That's the whole
great.
book. Except I actually did studies and confirmed it. So and there's all fancy big words and stuff in some places. But basically, conservatives are less likely to comprehend and appreciate ironic satire than liberals. And it's explained through their psychological traits that I mentioned before, because they are efficient thinkers. They operate through heuristics. They don't like thinking a lot. They don't like riddle solving. And now, these things are actually useful traits if you're like in a war, maybe, or going to fight a fire. When you're like encountering Stephen Colbert's show, The Colbert Report, back in the day, it meant you are definitely not going to understand his actual intention or what he's actually saying. So, and on the other side, because it opened up a question, right? So what do conservatives then appreciate as their aesthetic form that is consistent with their psychological profile? And the answer is the most lucrative content among conservatives, which is political talk radio, political talk cable news, because it's threat-oriented, very clear, no riddles, no irony. It tells you exactly who to be mad at. And they're not self-deprecating. They're like, I know the truth. Right? Remember the no spin zone and all that? It's like moral authority on high, signals like that guy knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
All of those things speak to that psychological profile.
Larry Elder, our current governor.
Yeah.
You can find it at your local, I don't know, but Amazon sells it, and Oxford University Press also sells it.
What's it called again? I'm going to get
Irony
this.
and Outrage.
Irony. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Listen back to the podcast. I think it's really funny that you say that about like that conservatives don't tend to understand irony or like sarcasm or those kinds of jokes, and they're more efficient thinkers. But then there's my mom, who isn't a conservative, who's not a conservative. She's just very much a bleeding heart liberal, but she absolutely has no idea what I'm saying 95% of the time. What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/bitchuation room. Do it.